Welcome to episode 30 of 10,000 Africans podcast. This is your host, JD Tarpe. Today on the show, we have Iyinoluwa Aboyeji, aka E. He is the founder and CEO of Flutterwave, which is a payment system that is changing the way business is done in Nigeria and on the continent. He is also a co-founder of the famous startup Andela, which managed to raise $24 million of investment from founders like Mark Zuckerberg and the likes. They managed to raise another $10 million with Flutterwave, and they've really been transforming the way banks operate and the way transactions happen on the continent. So this gentleman has been making waves of change in Africa, and it's reflected in this interview. So I'm very excited about it. Today we're doing something different. We're doing something new. For this week's podcast, we're splitting it into two parts. Part one is on Monday, and part two comes out on Wednesday. Without further ado, welcome to the show, Ian. I'm happy to have you on.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for the invite.
It is amazing to have you on the show, and I'm sure a lot of people are looking forward to hearing you and hearing your story. Now, I just give like a tip of what your story is, and it really is not your story. So I'll just ask you to, fill in the gaps. How has your story led you here? What is the story that's led you here?
Sure. So I've been in the technology space for the past 7 years. My story really starts in University of Waterloo in Canada. It was a transformational educational experience for me. Primarily because that was where I first got exposed to, technology entrepreneurship through the Velocity program. And I learned quite a bit in that program. I spent quite a lot of time in the residence, and ultimately when the garage opened, I was one of the first occupants of the garage. And probably spent more time in the garage and in the Velocity residence than I did in class. Just learning, how to build businesses and business ideas and hanging around entrepreneurs for inordinate amounts of time. But really, at the time, we started a company called booknetter.com. And what that company was doing started out as a kind of a place for past questions and answers. And until the school told us that, that we didn't own the intellectual property for the past question and answer, so we didn't have a right to make money off of that. So we kind of pivoted our business model to focus on helping professors who own their intellectual property to publish online courses. This was kind of in the very early days of the LMS boom. The LMS is popping left, right, and center. Some getting funding, some not getting funding. Udemy just started. So this is kind of the very early days of kind of like online learning in general. And so we're right in front of it, right before Coursera came up and Udacity came up. So it was really exciting times. But ultimately we decided to sell that business to one of our professors who was a client, and kind of hands off it. And then we started another company, this time for Africa, where we were focused on how do we build out that the course publishing experience for universities in Africa. And truth is like that started as a huge failure, right? Because like African universities had all these regulatory requirements that were required for you to be able to do distance learning. For example, you had to have 100 computers in the building. And it was like, what exactly is the point of building like an online course if you're going to have a building computer? like, okay, well, I guess not our profile of entrepreneur kind of business. So we pivoted again and we started to sell already made, done online courses into Nigeria, and that did pretty well until Andela kind of came. But the really cool thing was like, I mean, Fora on the surface was a failure, but like the investors did super super well. I was just telling JD, I was like the investors who invested $5,000 in Fora have stock probably worth like $150,000 in Andela today. You know,
talk about talk about return on your investment.
Yeah, definitely return the money. I can tell you that.
Gee. I should have been in on that. I wish.
I should have been in on that too, right? I don't think I was in on that enough.
Oh man, yeah. So like, I think there's a bunch of things that's so important because as an entrepreneur, you go through a lot of phases, and sometimes a lot of what looks like failures. So how do you go past that? How do you like see further than, you know, oh, this is not working out, so we need to pivot. This is not working out, there's a new opportunity. How do you do that?
My general rule of thumb is just being very intellectually honest. I think that's one thing that has really helped for me personally. A lot of people are not exactly intellectually honest. So when something is not working out, they want to pretend it is. You know what I mean? Or when something is not long term, like can be a long term thing. There's always a sense that something fantastic could make it so.
Yeah. And
you know, it just doesn't work that way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It just doesn't work that way. So I think what has helped a lot is just like, if something's not working out, like just facing the brutal facts of that reality and then confronting it and designing how you get out of that situation is really kind of what has helped me a lot. And I think also just maintaining optimism in very difficult circumstances. That also helps. A lot of people kind of raise their head up and, you know, just kind of, you know, get frustrated so easily. But I think one thing I've learned how to do is just ultimately realize that there's always a way out, even if I don't know what it is right now. And if I'm patient enough to explore the path, I'll get there. So I mean, those are kind of, you know, what I've my own learnings, and keeping the team together as much as possible also helps.
Very important stuff.
Yeah, and being very good to people, even when you have to leave them, because I mean, those are things I learned. You know, sticking with people, sticking with things, even when it's difficult. Because you know, shit happens, right? That's just life. But I learned a lot from my co-founders at Fora about just keeping the team together, and I learned a lot about their integrity in making sure that we carried our investors along from Fora to Andela, because that's what creates all this. That's what created all this wealth, right? Their help and our efforts and everything kind of merged together to make things work pretty decently. Yeah,
I respect that a lot, and I think there's a lot to learn from there. Now, before I even go further with questioning, I want to first congratulate you on your engagement. Yes, you recently got engaged, and we're all happy about that. And there's something that you said actually on Twitter, and you said, "This is the most important decision of your life."
Hiring decision.
Exactly, the most important hiring decision of your life. I think that is self-explanatory, but I want you to expand a little bit on that.
I mean, so one thing I've learned, I've had the pleasure of a lot of very amazing mentors and friends, and I've learned good things and bad things from their life. And one of the biggest lessons I've just learned from my most successful friends is just like, literally who you marry is like everything. It's literally that's it, right? If you make a mistake and marry the wrong person, that mistake fundamentally changes your life in ways that you can't even imagine. So I think I and I say that with every sense of humility, but I think I made a pretty I have a pretty good partner there, and you might not be. I mean, one of the other things I also learned is that um, this is not a decision where you can allow anybody else's opinion kind of influence you. You can't. This is one of the few hires you'd make you can't consult about.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Opinion, but yours really matters in this scenario. If you don't want trouble, so I think for me, I mean, she's an amazing woman. She's also an entrepreneur at heart, and she's obsessed with hair. So everything there is to learn about hair at this point. Um, but it's I've learned quite a bit. I must admit, I've learned quite a bit. It's been
I get you. I get you. So talking about business, you are doing fantastic with Flutterwave. I know right now it's in the process. It's growing and it's getting crazy huge, and we're going to talk about that even more. Um, but Andela, people went crazy over Andela. They're still going crazy over Andela. That was a huge success. By you and your co-founder. So let's just talk about that a little bit. You saw this niche. How did you find that niche in creating a company like Andela, and how did you know it was going to succeed?
I mean, we didn't know it was going to succeed, right?
Well, true.
We just gave it a shot, but I think what really pushed us to really give it a shot were two things, right? The first thing that really pushed us thinking about it was we I mean I was kind of part and party to an interesting experience where I saw a lot of young people in the National Stadium in Lagos, and they had all come for the immigration exam. And all of a sudden, there was this sudden stampede, and a number of people actually died in that stampede. And it was a huge scandal. But I think the incident got me thinking a lot, because I thought to myself, if there's, give or take, even 60,000 people in this stadium, which, the capacity was about 60,000 people. There's no chance you can tell me that these 60,000 people in the stadium were here to interview for probably 100, 200 jobs. Not even one of them could learn something that, could be more transformational from an income perspective, right? Than just trying to be an immigration officer. And so that gave me some ideas that, we're not a country that's lacking in talent. And then the question then became, okay, how do you find and build a training program that will basically instill the discipline and skills into young people so that they can do impactful work. And that was the real kind of part where we had to really put on our thinking hats and think really, really carefully about it. And one thing I also noticed was that people were getting more and more comfortable with the idea of remote work, working with developers offshore. And a lot of people were captivated by the social impact story. And I knew that a number of the fellows that we got in the first class, they were just special people, right? They had a work ethic. They really wanted it. So there was no chance that, that it wouldn't succeed in one form or the other. So that was my conviction about it.
That's beautiful. And then, you guys did very well, and you decide to leave after you guys had, you raised, I think, $10 million and everything. You decide to leave. Like it takes a lot of balls to to make that decision. So
did it really take? I don't know. I think for us it was just natural evolution, right? Like we're not like, this is not a political party. We're not sit tight dictators, you know. The company had grown very fast, and we had reached a milestone where it made sense for a different kind of leadership, and we made the decision to leave so that leadership has full reign over it. So that was basically the thought process.
Yeah, and I think you are very humble, by the way. I think it takes a lot to be able to see that, and to be able to see that, my time for leadership is. It takes a good leader in the sense to realize that, you know, it's a time for me to move on to something else and not hold on to this, right? So now talking about Flutterwave, man, you guys have been doing great stuff. You not recently hit over $1 billion in transactions. What I wanted to know is understand what Flutterwave is in the simplest terms for the masses. What does Flutterwave do? What is Flutterwave?
This is where we end part 1 of the podcast. Make sure to tune in for the rest of the conversation on part 2 on Wednesday. That is February 21st. I'm excited because the conversation only gets better. So stay tuned. We'll be back with Iyinoluwa Aboyeji. Thank you for listening again to another episode of 10,000 Africans podcast. And if you have any questions or if you want to reach out to me at 10,000africans@gmail.com. That is TEN1000africans@gmail.com. Also, you can donate to the podcast and to our continuous growth. Go to 10,000africans.com/donate to leave your donations. Send me recommendations, whatever. Email me. And as always, have a wonderful day.